This is Metabolic Mastery, a KORR Medical Technologies podcast dedicated to advancing knowledge and practice in metabolic testing. Welcome to Metabolic Mastery, brought to you by KORR Medical Technologies. I'm Dr. Marc Humbert. This is my co-host, Dr. Cameron Garber. And today we're going to be talking about KORR's effective fat burn graph. So last week we talked about the KORR dashboard, right? The results that you get following a VO2 test. And today we're going to talk about another part of that results page, the effective fat burn graph. And so we'll talk about fats and carbs. This will be a preview for another episode that goes more into depth into carbohydrate and fat metabolism, why CO2 is important to measure, and some other things along those lines. But we'll dive into these in just a sec. For those who are listening, we're going to be going over a couple of different fat burn graphs. Those will be available as downloadables in the show notes. And so let's dive into that first test. Give us a preview of what we're going to be talking about here.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that I love the very most about a cardio coach. It opens up a whole new world of insights by looking at both oxygen consumption as well as carbon dioxide production. By looking at carbon dioxide, CO2, it gives us a whole new look at how someone's metabolism is functioning. And so we can look at their fat and carbohydrate or substrate utilization. Awesome stuff. And so we have this graph in the results pages that is called the effective fat burn graph. And I love it. So let's orient you to the effective fat burn graph. So here on this example, you've got these different bars on this plot that are purple and yellow. So the purple bars are your fat calories burned per hour, and then the yellow are the carbohydrate calories burned per hour. Then underneath that, you've got a chart that shows at each step along the way what the time was, what the heart rate was, and what the settings were on the treadmill.
Yeah, what was your workload?
Your workload,
Yep.
essentially.
How did we increase intensity across the test?
Yep. And so it's a very fun graph to be able to show people with. And this is the graph that I call my crystal ball, where I can see how you have been training, where you're at right now, and then what we need to do to fix that if need be, or that it's working if you're killing it. And so we need to continue on. And so really, really fun. So we've got a couple examples here of the different types of outcomes that we see. And there are lots. There's a lot of different patterns that you find with different types of athletes. Sometimes you'll see different body types influence that with the type of athlete that they are. But we'll dive into a few. This first one is kind of what we like to see as people are making changes in their health and fitness and are improving a bigger base of fitness as well as having some high-end training. And so let's orient you to this a little bit. So as we look at this graph, this is a female, 44, has a few kids, and is got a fairly high BMI. So she's about 318 pounds and has begun this weight loss journey. So she actually came to test with me because she was a referral from a friend who had tested with me, who had been doing kind of training the way I asked her to. And so she got her friend on board. And so they were training together, which is great. And so she's been doing this for a few weeks now, about 6 or 8 weeks. And so it had made a difference in her metabolism. And so what we can see here, she's got a really clear fat burn zone, right? So her zone 1 and zone 2, we can see here in this graph. And then you've got this transition from fat burning to carbohydrate burning. So you're kind of transition from zone 2 to zone 3. And then where the fat burn really drops off, it's zone 4. And then here at the end, you've got where she's gone anaerobic, and that's zone 5. That's how I classify the zones using kind of this substrate utilization method, where we can pick different physiological points that we can see of like, okay, this is happening here, this is happening here. And that's how I set those zones especially for the wellness client or for somebody that's looking to lose weight.
Yeah. Well, and it's just nice because, again, we're anchoring it to these physiological transition points.
Yeah.
And so that gives us more insight, again, on what's going on inside their body, what energy systems are they using? We've talked about that before, right? How our body uses a mix of energy systems. And ideally, we can switch between those very easily, very flexibly, right? We call that metabolic flexibility. And so when we can help people train in those zones and we know what's happening metabolically, then we know that we're going to be pushing the type of adaptations that we want to. Otherwise, it's kind of guesswork. Like, I hope this is working. I hope that this is driving the adaptations that I'm looking for. But if we don't have any insight into the energy systems,
Mhm.
it becomes a much more difficult, process of doing that. And so being able to see, when am I highly efficient and effective at burning fat? When do I start to onboard more carbohydrate to help? When am I mostly anaerobic, right? And that's indicative of this is a really high intensity effort. My oxidative system can't keep up. And so fatigue is not far behind. And so this helps us program again for helping people become more efficient at utilizing fat, can help in weight loss efforts, can also help in avoiding overtraining, right?
Mhm.
Overdoing things, getting injured, burned out. As we talk about basically every time, consistency is key. And so
Yeah.
using this data, using this graph to help us program in such a way that we drive adaptations while also helping them to stay within that recovery window so that they can adapt and train, adapt and train.
Yeah. And a common kind of, I don't know, criticism or question about this effective fat burn graph is this the same way every time someone exercises or every time they test? And so if you were to do a test like in the afternoon after they'd eaten and things like that, you might see that this effective fat burn graph, if you're just doing a VO2 max test, you might see that this looks different then. And the reason why is often that they didn't have a chance to burn off any blood sugar and things like that. So the more you do a warm up beforehand and they have a chance to kind of burn off what they've just eaten, then these will sync up pretty
Yeah.
well. And so oftentimes people will question it because if you do another test, especially if you're not taking an adequate warm up ahead of time, then they won't sync up with a morning test versus an afternoon test or things like that. But most of the time, it's just because they didn't do an adequate warm up. And so once you've done that and you burn off kind of heightened blood sugar from what you've most recently eaten or things like that, then they sync up pretty well. And so that's a test I like to do with my students. Is I'll have them do more of a traditional ramp um, graded exercise test, and then tell them a day or two later, go on a 3 to 5 mile run, depending on how fit they are and stuff. Go on a 3 mile run and then come back in, hop on the treadmill at the same place that we set your zone, and we'll find that your fat burn is synced up like really well with your original test.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things. That's why we have them come in fasted, and we want to eliminate as many variables as we can so we can see what their metabolism is actually doing, and then with the different life factors, they tend to bear out still once we've gotten a good warm up and we get into more of a steady state.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that I love about the cardio coach is that you can do these alternate forms of testing
Yeah.
so that we can do your regular traditional VO2 max test, but then we can have someone come in a variety of conditions and just run that VO2 long mode. And so we can do like that zone confirmation test, right? We can do
Yep.
the kind of fat max testing. There's a variety of different testing that we can use to provide resolution on some of these zones in a little bit different way. And so there's a variety of ways to look at this. But you're exactly right, right? When we standardize those conditions, repeatability is really good, right? The accuracy
Yeah.
is really good. And again, then some people have the complaint. It's like, okay, well, repeated tests, maybe that shows up the same. But when people go out and, maybe it's hotter, maybe it's more humid, that's not going to be accurate at all. And back to your point, right? It may not be the same exact point, but we're not saying like you have to exercise at this exact heart rate, right? Exercise at 150 beats per minute, and that's your point. And if you go above,
Yeah.
this is why we look
147, and if you're
point 0.5.
right.
You better have those. And so it's looking at this as a range. Within this range, we know that people remain very fat efficient and very fat effective. And so,
Yeah.
Obviously those environmental factors can play a role, but that's also why we're anchoring workouts with more than just these zones alone, right? The zones are important. That helps us to know the range that we want to be in. But then we're also anchoring it with, well, like, do I feel like this is a lot harder today? Or at the same pace, is my heart rate much higher today?
Yeah.
Or some of these other things, such that, okay, like, it is hotter, or it is more humid. Like, I probably won't be able to push as hard as usually, and that's going to be reflected in my heart rate anyway.
Right.
And so again, um, because it's not in this single point, because we're relying on some of these other anchors, it actually ends up being really reliable. And otherwise, most of the methods are based on percentages, right? And so it's like, well, am I actually driving the adaptations that I'm thinking to? I just ran this through some random percentages and hopefully, but being able to actually look at the metabolic data and have people train according to the metabolic data, we know that we can get people the results that we're looking for, right? We know that we can structure training plans in such a way that it drives the adaptations that we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this graph can be really, really helpful at seeing where someone's at, as well as where do we need to go from here.
Yeah, so
because of that.
descriptive and prescriptive.
Yeah, exactly. And so when we dive back into this, so again, the example of the high BMI female, we see that she's burning calories at about 370 at her peak, fat calories per hour. We can take a look and see her total calorie burn being, around 800 at her peak. At her very most, she's able to burn about 800 total calories an hour. And so that number can be helpful at times to see just how big is their overall calorie burning engine, how fit are they, and how long can they last at that anaerobic state. That gives us some clues into their fitness level.
Yeah. Well, like you mentioned in a previous episode, no one's lasting for an hour at that max intensity.
Totally.
But as you said, it gives us an insight into what are their energy systems capable of producing.
Right.
And so that gives us a good idea of like how things are working overall.
Yeah. And so that can really help us to see, like, do they have enough muscle mass and things so that they can burn enough calories to be effective. So when we see her fat burn at 370 fat calories an hour, that's really good. So she has built up some lean muscle to where she can burn a meaningful amount of calories as she exercises so that weight loss is possible. And so because she's been doing this, she was lifting weights and just walking or cycling at a low intensity. That was kind of where she started out, because that's, again, I told her friend, this is where we should start out to kind of heal your metabolism and things like that. And so she began that process, and it seems to be working very well, where she's got clear, good fat burn zone. We can see down here, we've got zone 1 is kind of this early part where we're kind of up to about, and her zones are really, really low. Her heart rate never got all that terribly high either. And so zone 1, you've got that up to, about 70 beats per minute. And then we see this jump from 70 to about 95 to 100. I always like to leave a little buffer in there so that people aren't riding, right? So I told her 95 is the top of zone 2, so that she's not riding 100 beats per minute. She'll probably, if I tell people 95, then they try to get to 95. Whereas at 90, it's just as effective as it is at 95. And so going faster isn't necessarily better.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's good to do that, right? Put that buffer in just to deal with the psychology of how we approach exercise, and with the understanding that you really can't separate physiology from psychology. And so when we're using these data to prescribe training zones, it's that mix of art and science, right?
Yeah.
We're taking the data, but we're also applying it to real people with a variety of different situations, with a variety of strengths and weaknesses. And so being able to understand some of that and use that in our prescription can really help to dial it in for the individual.
Yeah, and that way we're locked in to see, like, for your body, what should we do?
Yeah.
And so then we've got that zone 2, which is where we want her to spend most of her time. And then from there, at about 95 to 100, we've switched over fuel systems to where we're burning more carbohydrate. And so at that point, we're in that zone 3, what I call the no progress zone. It's not bad for you. You're just not going to see much improvement in your fitness you dig a big carbohydrate hole. We can see there that we're digging this big hole of carbohydrate that we're going to have to eat to get back from and replenish from, that we're going to be more susceptible to injury because we have to replenish those carbohydrate reserves before we can kind of move on in terms of repairing tendon, ligament, bone, muscle. We have this big recovery gap. And so, training there is just going to frustrate the process long term, more susceptible to injury. We're burning less of what we intend to burn in the first place. And it just makes us more hungry and feel more miserable. And so we might as well back down where we burn a higher amount of fat. And then when we really want to push hard, we push up into that zone 4, zone 5 area, where we're actually going harder than we can currently sustain, so that we're pushing those adaptations for change. So let's show you now a kind of very different client. We've got somebody that's quite a bit more fit, of a healthy BMI, but have kind of an unhealthy metabolic state. And so let's take a look at this. So this is a kind of a 54-year-old female going through perimenopause. And so she's a healthy body weight, 143 pounds, puts her at a 21 BMI, right in the sweet spot. Like, wouldn't want to really lose any weight, but definitely body composition is always a factor. And she felt like she was getting fluffier, is the term she used. She felt like she was, changing her body composition and wanted to make a change. And so when we look at her graph, it looks very different. So in the purple and yellow bars, we see that her fat burn is borderline non-existent. So at her very best fat burn, she's only burning about 100 fat calories an hour, which, if we're kind of saying, okay, if it takes 3,500 to 4,200 calories, is 1 pound of fat, depending on cell walls and water and whatever.
All that good stuff.
Yeah, so it's that range. So you're talking 35 to 42 hours worth of exercise to lose 1 pound of fat. No wonder why she's frustrated and having a hard time losing weight and things like that, right? And so that idea of her fat burn just really is non-existent. And when I saw this graph where we see very poor fat burn, really high carbohydrate burn throughout the whole thing, we see that she is borderline anaerobic, so where she's burning very little carbohydrate for a very long time in the test, for almost 6 minutes. We can see, if you look at the timeline down at the bottom, we can see her fat burn dropped down to basically nothing at about the 15-minute mark, and she was able to keep going until the 21-minute mark. So she was able to push for quite a long time. So I can tell that she does suffer fitness. Her VO2 max was about 32.8, which puts her kind of in a healthy category, in the excellent category. But I see that her overall calorie burn at 620 calories is fairly low. She was able to suffer. So it made me ask a bunch of questions of her. First question was, I see that you can suffer pretty well. What do you do for your fitness? Because I see that your overall calorie burn is fairly low, which fits this pattern of, I can suffer, but I don't burn very many calories and I don't burn fat very well. Fits this pattern of kind of high intensity training. And so I said, do you do mostly like boot camp style classes, body pump, dance fitness, things where they combine cardio and weights together? She's like, yeah, I do. That's all I do is classes.
How did you know?
How did you know?
My crystal ball.
My crystal ball. Yeah, it tells me. I see the pattern. And so, yeah, this is something I see all the time, where you try to combine cardio and weight training. It's not terribly effective for fat burning typically.
And not terribly effective for putting on muscle.
Right. And it's really not good at putting on muscle at all, because we're never really overloading that muscle. We feel the burn because of, buildup of byproducts in our muscles. So we feel a burn, but we're not going to fatigue. And so I saw that, and that made me ask a bunch of other questions like, I see that most of the time you're working out then in that high intensity zone. Is that right? What's your average heart rate? And she's like, yeah, high 130s to 140s, which is in that same zone, right? Where things dropped off. You can see there at the heart rates along that bar at the bottom. So okay, you're working out the whole time. Have you found that you're really hungry? Yeah, not right away. My stomach kind of doesn't feel like eating right away, but then later I'm starving all day. Okay, that tracks. What about um, injuries? Have you had a lot of injuries? Yeah, the last 3 years I've had some kind of major injury setback. That tracks because you're always in this depleted state, always trying to catch up with your fitness. Said, have you also noticed that the amount of weight that you're lifting is less than it was before? Yeah, I used to use 15 and 20 pound weights, and now I'm down to 5 and 7 pound weights for these classes. And so for this, we were able to, tell what that was, what was happening there and all these things. And funny enough, her heart rate zones are similar to the other gal who, has a very different metabolic profile. So we actually set her at about 90 beats per minute, trying to, maximize her fat burn. And so we said, right now, I don't want you to do much in the way of high intensity. So you can go to one class a week, but for right now, we've got to heal your metabolism. So we're just going to have you walk and then switch up your weight training to just lifting heavy weights, heavy and slow. And so we had to help because part of why she loved the classes was because she didn't have to think about it,
Yeah.
right? She just could go and show up and do the workout. So we had to give her some workouts that she could follow and do that made her so she didn't have to think about it, but just follow those out the window. And so that's kind of the idea with these effective fat burn graphs is it allows us to see their pattern, where they've been training, how they've been training, what that's done to their metabolism, and then what we need to do moving forward. So for somebody like this where they're frustrated and they just aren't seeing those results, she said, what I've been doing for the last 30 years just isn't working for me anymore. And that tracks. We've worked out in a way that's driven down lean muscle tissue. We've also so that was one of the other questions when I saw how few calories she burned was how many calories a day are you eating? Is it pretty low? She's like, yeah, because I've noticed that my body composition is changing. I started eating fewer calories to try to lose weight. And it's like, well, it's not a weight loss issue, it's a muscle issue. Your weight is totally perfect where we want it to be, but we want to change body composition so that you're, less fat mass and more lean mass. And so that was the key was switching that body composition. And so that's what we were trying to work on. And so more heavy, slow strength training, probably double your protein intake or more, depending on where she was at. And let's build some muscle back up so you can burn more calories, burn more fat calories, and change everything up.
Well, and it's just like we've talked about before, starting with where they're at and then building from there. And it doesn't
Yep.
have to be these drastic, crazy changes. It's just let's tweak this and that. One thing, real quick, I just want to talk to because you used a phrase that totally speaks to like kind of what we're trying to do is heal your metabolism.
Yeah.
And that can be kind of like a weird word for some people
Yeah.
just because they're like, oh, my metabolism was broken, I was doing something wrong. The truth is, our bodies are highly adaptable. They're incredibly adaptable across our lifespan. And so they adapt to the conditions that we place them in.
Yeah.
And so what happens is, depending on our training, depending on our lifestyle, depending on our nutrition habits, that adaptation might kind of build inefficiencies into our system,
Mhm.
right? We can't metabolize energy as efficiently. We can't get glucose into the cell where it needs to be used. We can't mobilize fat to where it needs to be used. And so, like, in a sense, our metabolism isn't as efficient and effective as it could be in terms of utilizing energy, putting it where it needs to go, not overstoring, but
Mhm.
storing the right amounts. And so when we adapt eating behaviors, when we adapt training, and we speak of healing metabolism, it's really just giving our body the best chance to adapt to be the most effective and efficient at doing what it does.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, it's like for years, often we can absorb a lot of maybe substandard training or suboptimal training.
Mhm.
But eventually, as we age, right, even though we're adaptable, we do take a little bit longer to recover, right? Some things change. And so optimizing our eating, optimizing our training, optimizing our lifestyle can help us to get through plateaus and not wonder like, oh, is my body broken? Am I messed up? It's really like, well, no, your body's doing what it does. Let's just coax it along to help it be better at doing what it does.
Right. Your body is fine. You are choosing to undereat while overtraining, and then that's caused some metabolic problems. But and unfortunately, we just don't have the information often that we need to be able to make the correct decisions about what to do for our metabolism and what to do for our eating. And that's why we should get metabolic testing done.
Yeah.
So that we can know for my body, where do I need to be? How many calories should I be eating? How should I be training for my body, for my goals? So that, if my goals is to be more fat adapted and being able to build endurance and push harder in my workouts while having it feel easier, well, then let's train in the way that will help me do that. And I can see where that is for what my goals are with a metabolic test.
Absolutely. It really gives us a good roadmap so that we can make the best decisions for our future.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today. We'll talk about this a little bit more, as we said, on a future episode. But this is kind of a nice brief primer, and really goes to show some of the big benefits of the cardio coach, right? The dashboard, like we talked about last time, and then this effective fat burn graph. So stay tuned for the next episode. As always, if you want more content like this, remember to like, follow, and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time. This podcast is a production of KORR Medical Technologies. Ready to take your metabolic testing to the next level? Visit KORR.com to learn more about purchasing our metabolic test equipment.